This is the recorded lecture number 2 of the series, Causes of World War I, Militarism. All right, so our focus for this World War I unit is who do we actually blame for all these rising tensions that lead to this global conflict? Remember, according to Sidney Fay, we can't just blame one country, whereas Kissinger always wants to blame Germany. We have to actually divide these causes into main: militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism. You're going to get tired of me saying that. Today, we're going to evaluate militarism. How can we evaluate it for a cause, but then also, are some more guilty than others? Alfred Watz, a German historian who served in World War I, he defines militarism as the domination of the military man over the civilian, an undue preponderance of military demands, and an emphasis on military considerations. Now, Bismarck, he just calls it Weltpolitik, or hit him with a big stick, so to speak, and claim what's yours. Now, this form of military diplomacy is about acknowledging who has the larger military and who can easily protect their friends or the resources that they need for survival or territorial expansion. Now, you must know your opponent's strengths and weaknesses before you attack. That's that diplomacy side. Bismarck's diplomacy of war to consolidation and then back to peace again is what we call realpolitik. It's avoiding confrontation, and you're aligning your country with your allies. That compares sharply with Wilhelm's policy of war nationalism. And we're talking about Wilhelm II, good old boy Willie. We can actually look at military history all throughout for the last thousands of years as really just a few military men who solely influence government policies. Now, a really great example of that is Admiral Tirpitz, who's the founder of the German Navy going into World War I. He used a series of fake news campaigns in order to be able to multiply the size of his navy, and we can do the same thing as we look at the rest of the world in the 19th century. There's a few examples. We're not going to look at that entire list, but we will eventually. The British Empire is obviously the most large example. They covered over 13 million square miles of land. They had more than 22%, that's almost a quarter of the world's land mass, and the empire had over 458 million people in 1938. Yes, I know I'm jumping towards World War II, but it's beside the point. That's more than 20% of the world population. Now, who do we actually thank for that decision making? Yeah, it's a few military men and, of course, a few crowns along the way who instilled the protectorate status over various newly acquired lands. But when they acquired those lands, they put people in charge, very few people in charge, to make those decision making. Now, they often made those people based off of historic, ethnic, race, and religious divisions among those populations that were already occurring. So they used some of those ethnic divisions and really just made that racism in those countries even worse. The Franco-Prussian War was really just fought by Bismarck as an excuse to use war as a means of unifying Germany into one solid country. France really feared being surrounded by German influence, and they lost Alsace and Lorraine as a consequence. Now, one military man, one conflict, one new Germany. So next, let's look at the previous lecture about imperialism. You can't have imperialism without a strong navy in order to back it up. France tried to pick a fight with the UK, not allowing them on the Nile River, especially because they felt that they were in control of Sudan. And while Britain held Egypt, they brought out their dreadnought, and France says, you know what, you're right, the Nile ain't so great after all. We actually like Morocco better. However, when Willie is sitting back there and he's watching this French and British squabble in their little pre-fighting, he's thinking, the British and the French say that they have each other's backs as an alliance, but I'm literally watching them avoid barely going to war over a river. They're really not that tight. So Willie, Wilhelm II, with his new Tirpitz Navy in hand, shows up at the Moroccan coast to find out, will Britain come to France's aid if I threaten their lands? And Britain says, yeah, we don't like the French, but an alliance is dead in the water if we don't protect their imperial interests. So the UK has to stand up and go against Germany. Now, just seriously, pause for a second. When we're looking at Maine and who to blame for World War I, who is the policeman of the world at this point? And is being that policeman of the world, is that aggression or is that protection? Is this action or reaction? And we're going to find this theme again as we go through not only World War II, but of course the Cold War. All right, militarism is like fashion. Once you see what your friends are wearing, you gotta have it. However, it's a never-ending cycle. And when you hyper-nationalize, working to prove your country's superiority through military standing, things start to get a little out of control. Who's most guilty? Between 1906 and 1914, Britain and Germany have locked themselves down in a battle over boats. For every German naval warcraft, the UK would double down in what they call the two-power standard. There has to be 2 British dreadnoughts to every 1 German dreadnought. Military might and preparation is Weltpolitik in action. So again, who do we blame? Tensions are building all throughout the turn of the century, and at this point, honestly, war was pretty much inevitable. Everybody are just a bunch of peacocks wanting to show their feathers. All those participating monarchs are wanting the opportunity to show off these new standing militaries, and they're getting super restless. They've spent a bunch of time on all this new technology, and they honestly thought it was going to be a short victory because that's what hypernationalism does. It kind of blinds you a little bit in that diplomatic thought. They thought it'd be a lot like Prussia had against the victory against Austria, which led to the Treaty of Prague in 1964, which ultimately took care of any sort of Austrian influence over Germany. Now, Germany's biggest fear, once they got rid of the Austrian question, was how do they deal with a combined attack? If they started a war with France, are they going to have to fight a two-front war with Russia if France and Russia united, which they ultimately do in the Allied powers? How do they fend off those two sides and maintain military superiority? They know that they can't fight two sides at once. Now, the Schlieffen Plan ends up being their solution to that problem. They're going to start by invading Belgium. While Russia is slow to mobilize because nobody has a lot of faith in Russia's ability to mobilize with their giant country, they're going to take that time, go through Belgium, move into Paris, take over Paris, and loop back to the German-controlled Alsace and Lorraine. By the time that they sweep all of France, they're not only going to gain more resources and be ready for the slow Russian bear to reach their borders, but sadly, they openly publicized this theory, telling their enemies exactly what they would plan to do if attacked. And even more tragic is that they actually followed through with these published plans when war was declared. By 1914, right at the brink of World War I, most of Europe had entered into military alliances. Not ones of the traditional cute 1800s politics where they promise not to intervene in conflict, but the actual blank check type. If one of the allies are attacked, all the friends would respond without any question in a domino effect of militaristic might. The Allies, France, UK, Russia, and part of the Balkans, they're poised against Germany, Austria-Hungary, Italy, which turns coat halfway through, and Turkey in 1914 when the Archduke Ferdinand was shot by Gavrilo Princip. Heavy artillery, machine guns, tanks, motorized transport vehicles, high explosives, chemical weapons, airplanes, field radios, telephones, aerial reconnaissance cameras, and rapidly advancing medical technology and science, there's just a few of the areas that reshaped the 20th century warfare. Machine guns and rapid-fire artillery, when used in combination with trenches and barbed wire emplacements, gave a decided advantage to the defense, since the weapons' rapid and sustained firepower could decimate a front assault by the infantry or cavalry. Militaries had to quickly adapt to this new technology, setting themselves down for a long haul in trenches where they're literally going to fight months over just a half a mile gain or loss in territory. So within the first year of World War I, every European country had to adapt their economy to something that we call war socialism, where the central government assigns production goals, and they mobilize the entire population into the war effort. So for example, if you used to make clothing, now you're making uniforms for the war. Total war forces all citizens to participate in the losses and the victories, both with blood and your economy. Now, by the end of World War I, that has large-term implications that are going to lead us into the Cold War. The stage is going to be set for this socialist and communist propaganda that's going to be fighting hand in hand with that traditional capitalistic European model. With warfare being more violent and more deadly than anything that Europe had ever seen prior, it was plagued with debt and destruction. Rebuilding the continent of Europe as a whole led to more hatred and bitterness, which ends up begging the question, did World War I ever actually end, or was it just a pause until the next Great War? Here's your essential questions. Go back through, look at your notes, also refer to your reading, see if you can find some of those causes that militarism is the #1 cause for World War I. And then, of course, we're trying to assign guilt. So are there certain countries that are starting to look more guilty than others? See if you can kind of keep a running tally of offenses as we move forward.